Imagine a man who starts with almost nothing. No giant kingdom, no palace, no powerful army waiting for him. Just a boy growing up in the harsh Mongolian steppe. And somehow, that boy would eventually build the largest contiguous land empire in history. His name was Genghis Khan. But here's the part that makes his story terrifying. He didn't simply conquer cities. His armies crossed deserts, rode across mountains, and appeared hundreds of miles away before their enemies were ready. Entire kingdoms surrendered because they knew what might happen if they refused. But how did one man turn scattered tribes into one of the most powerful military forces the medieval world had ever seen? And what made Genghis Khan so dangerous? Chapter 1. The Boy Who Lost Everything. Before he was Genghis Khan, he was Temüjin, and his childhood was nothing like the life of a future emperor. His father was killed when Temüjin was still young. His family was abandoned by their own tribe. They were left with almost nothing. Food became difficult to find. Survival became the family's daily problem. Imagine being a child and realizing there may be no one coming to save you. Temüjin learned something early. The steppe doesn't care who you are. If you can't survive, you disappear. But those years also taught him something else. How to build loyalty, how to understand people, and how dangerous betrayal could be. Years later, those lessons would help him build an empire. Chapter 2. He didn't build his army the old way. The Mongolian steppe was divided between rival tribes. They fought each other, raided each other, and constantly changed alliances. Temüjin understood the problem. If everyone remained divided, someone would eventually destroy them. So he began bringing tribes together. But he didn't simply reward people because they came from the right family. He increasingly rewarded loyalty and ability. A talented warrior could rise. A loyal follower could become powerful, and a former enemy could eventually become one of his commanders. This created something unusual. His army wasn't simply a collection of warriors following their relatives. It became a disciplined military system. And once those warriors were united, the rest of Asia was about to discover what that meant. Chapter 3. The horse was his secret weapon. Picture a Mongol army approaching. You hear horses, then more horses, then even more. But here's what makes it terrifying. The Mongols weren't relying on one giant attack. Their cavalry could move incredibly quickly. A single warrior could have multiple horses available during long campaigns. That meant an army could travel enormous distances while keeping its speed. And Mongol horsemen were deadly archers. They could shoot while riding. They could turn away from an enemy and still attack. To an army expecting a slow-moving enemy, this was a nightmare. You might think you've defeated them, and then suddenly, they're behind you. Chapter 4. The Fake Retreat. Now comes one of the most dangerous tricks. Imagine you're fighting the Mongols. You see them retreat. They're running away. Your commanders think they're losing, so your army chases them. You move farther and farther away from your defensive position. The Mongols keep retreating. Then, they turn around. Suddenly, the retreat was an ambush. Your army is exhausted. Your formation is broken, and the enemy you've been chasing is now attacking you. This kind of maneuver became one of the weapons that made Mongol armies so difficult to defeat. They weren't just physically fast. They were trying to make you make the wrong decision. Chapter 5. The Siege Problem. But there was one major weakness. The Mongols were famous horsemen. So what happens when you reach a massive city with thick walls? You can't simply ride through it. So the Mongols adapted. They used engineers and siege specialists from conquered peoples. They learned techniques for attacking fortified cities. They used siege engines. They used captured expertise. And suddenly, walls weren't enough. A city that thought, the Mongols can't get through, could discover they had another problem. The Mongols were learning. Every campaign made them more experienced. Every enemy they defeated could potentially teach them something new. Chapter 6. Fear became a weapon. Genghis Khan understood something brutally well. You don't always have to fight an army if you can convince it not to fight. Some cities surrendered, others resisted, and the consequences of resistance could be devastating. Stories of Mongol destruction spread far beyond the battlefield. Fear traveled faster than armies. Imagine hearing that an enormous Mongol force is approaching. Brutal. Calling him simply a hero, or simply a monster, misses the complexity of what he actually was. He was an empire builder whose expansion came with a staggering human cost. Chapter 7. The empire becomes enormous. By the time of his later campaigns, Genghis Khan's power had expanded far beyond Mongolia. His armies had conquered huge territories across Asia, and the man who had once struggled to find enough food was now ruling an empire stretching across enormous distances. But Genghis Khan didn't simply disappear after creating it. He continued campaigning. In 1227, he was fighting against the Western Shay. Then, something happened that no army could prevent. He became seriously ill, and this is where the story becomes mysterious. We know Genghis Khan died in 1227, but historians cannot confidently establish one exact cause of death. Later accounts offer different explanations. His burial place also remains unconfirmed. The conqueror who seemed impossible to stop simply disappeared from the historical record. Think about where Genghis Khan started. A boy, abandoned on the Mongolian steppe. No empire. No palace, no enormous army. And decades later, his name was known across a vast part of Eurasia. His greatest weapon wasn't just the sword. It wasn't even the horse. It was his ability to organize people, adapt to enemies, move quickly, and turn fear into power. He changed warfare, he changed borders, he changed the history of Eurasia. But his story also came with enormous destruction. That's the uncomfortable truth about Genghis Khan. He could be brilliant, strategic, and extraordinarily effective, while also being responsible for campaigns that caused catastrophic loss of life. And perhaps that's why, more than 8 centuries later, people are still asking the same question. How did one man from the Mongolian steppe become one of the most feared conquerors the world has ever seen? The answer isn't one weapon, one battle, or one army. It was the combination of speed, strategy, organization, adaptation, and fear.